All right, we are joined now by author, journalist, and professor Christian Parenti to talk about his what Vox called a buzzy new piece. The headline, it's in Compact magazine. The headline is Trump's, you can put this up here, Trump's real crime is opposing empire. It has produced a couple of responses, the one I mentioned in Vox, another one in Foreign Policy by the kind of former Bernie Sanders foreign policy guy, Matt Duss. Christian, let's talk through some of the points that you made here. So what is how would you lay out your general thrust of the piece here?
Well, I argue that Donald Trump is hated because of his foreign policy. That if you look at what he did in office, there was a lot that benefited the 1%. So this is a critique from the left. And if you look at Trump from the left, you say, well, he passed massive tax cuts and the rich like that. And he pushed deregulation very aggressively. 85% of it was blocked through the courts. But, he pushed a right-wing agenda on the economic front domestically. So why do they hate him? Why does the establishment hate this guy so much? If you look at his foreign policy, it starts to make sense because in the realm of foreign policy, his actions were anti-imperialist. He didn't have some sort of left-wing anti-imperialist sensibility, but what he did was very threatening to America's informal empire as established after World War II. He consistently talked about wanting to leave, and that is to say, destroy NATO. He ordered the withdrawal of about a third of the troops in Germany, and Germany is a central hub for a whole region-wide network of U.S. influence. AFRICOM is run out of Germany. There's 150 nukes in Germany. There's 40 different bases that have American personnel in Germany, and they project power into 104 different countries. So he's attacking NATO, which was the centerpiece of American empire. He refused to start any new wars. Yes, he had some drone strikes and some missile strikes, but he refused to escalate in Libya. He refused to escalate and try and overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and he actually drew down troops and moved them over to where the oil is, famously. But there's not that much oil in Syria, and Syria doesn't export oil. It's like they produce like 300 barrels a day, 300,000 barrels a day for domestic consumption. He withdrew troops from Iraq and from Afghanistan. He negotiated the end to the Afghan war, even if the dirty work of actually ending that war fell to Biden. That process of withdrawal was prevented all the way along, sabotaged by the Pentagon itself, and thus it was delayed. He discussed withdrawing troops from South Korea. He floated the idea of withdrawing about a quarter of the 28,000 troops that were there. Maybe not a quarter. He talked about withdrawing 4,000 of the 28,000 troops that were stationed in South Korea. He demanded that Korea pay cost plus 50%, and then that became his thing. He wanted every country that was housing U.S. troops to pay cost plus 50%. So he saw American empire as a poorly run security business in which the U.S. was being ripped off. He didn't see any of the benefits that come to American capitalism, particularly, maybe not American capitalism, that implies all the workers and consumers as well, but to the American ruling class, the American 1% reaps many of the benefits of American empire. He didn't see that and took a hammer to the whole thing. He canceled the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He wanted to unilaterally scrap NAFTA, but he had one of his top economic advisors stole the document off his desk by which he was going to do that. He then successfully renegotiated NAFTA. I mean, if you just add it all up, the guy was a vandal. He acted as a vandal towards the informal structure of American empire.
It's interesting because if we cut to the criticism from Zach Beauchamp over at Vox, he tweets, in just two countries, Iraq and Syria, Trump's drone war killed 3 times as many civilians as the Gulf War, Kosovo intervention, and Libya wars combined. And I think your argument is more interesting than that. Your argument is that if you weigh Trump's vandalism against Trump's hawkishness, it comes out on the side of the vandalism, that his sort of vandalistic instincts were a net in the aggregate, they were more powerful than
They were a threat. They were.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, they
if you could just
constituted a
flesh
genuine
out
threat.
how you weigh both of those and come out on the side of the point that you raised in the article, which I agree with, because that seems like what you're doing, because you acknowledge that in the article. You say there was dronings. You don't dispute that, but that it weighs on one side more strongly for the benefit of a better foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, his actions add up to destabilization of this very elaborate architecture of base deployments, military assets, treaties, relationships with individual countries through diplomacy, formal and informal. I mean, the entire, the business relationships that the U.S. government and U.S. corporations have around the world. This entire structure has to be reproduced carefully. And he was doing the opposite. He wasn't consciously, systematically dismantling it. He wasn't a peacenik who was like, we're not going to kill anyone. The bloodshed stops now. No, he was a crassly transactional ADD vandal, He wanted to close all the embassies in Africa. Partly, put in the context of his other comments, because he seems quite racist, right? I mean, he referred to Africa and Haiti, countries in Africa and Haiti in really derogatory ways. But you can close all the embassies in Africa. The embassies are a major source of, institutional footprint for the CIA. He didn't get it. And so I tried to imagine what it would be like to be a foreign policy elite, or really any kind of elite in DC, with this guy in power. It would be very frightening. It would be, infuriating, and you would want to get rid of him. So that's the argument. It's not that Trump's foreign policy was ultra-Pacific and that he was guided by high and noble ideas, and that he had a plan for a new, totally coherent, different kind of foreign policy. I think he was reacting kind of episodically based on this crass transactional sensibility. We're getting ripped off. Enough of that. We want to get paid properly. But it added up to the most powerful player in the U.S. government vandalizing U.S. empire. And that, I think, alienated a whole class of quite powerful politicians, diplomats, and military and intelligence-connected bureaucrats. And that helps explain why there is this campaign against him and his followers. And it is not because he was in other ways attacking the class interests of the American elite. It was specifically in this realm.
Yeah, and a lot of the progressive kind of critics of this essay that listed a lot of his kind of militarist aggression overseas. But I don't, to me, and I want to list some of those for you to get you to respond, but to me that doesn't necessarily undermine the point you're making. It might somewhat complicated, but it makes you think kind of a little bit more deeply about, well, what is the empire, and what part of it is dispensable, and what part of it is kind of essential to its operation and its power expression. But just like to let's run through some of the things that people would flag as Trump kind of even one-upping, say, Obama or Biden. 2017. And 2018, he orders strikes on Syria, like you mentioned, deploying some of the troops to the oil fields. But like you said, these are actually tiny oil fields, which Trump probably didn't even realize. He just thought they're over in the Middle East. They must have a lot of oil. He ripped up the Iran deal, which the kind of national security establishment had been really hostile in a lot of ways to the Iran deal. He then kills Qasem Soleimani in what was that, January of 2020, while he's also ordering the Pentagon to come up with war games about, as we now know from Ken Klippenstein's recent reporting, toward to war game a war with Iran. There's reporting that he got very close to ordering airstrikes on Iran right after the election. If not for January 6th, there may have been he may have launched another set of airstrikes against
Iran.
He
may have, but he didn't.
But
he didn't. Yeah.
Right. What else we got? The coup. He backed a coup. But here, and let's start like he tried to back a coup in Venezuela. He backed
until
a coup
it started going bad, and then he didn't. Then he started talking about Maduro's good-looking generals. He referred to Juan Guaido as the Beto O'Rourke of Venezuela politics.
Yeah.
And he had conflict with John Bolton. He explained to Tucker Carlson, not in an interview, but according to sources, that he said, "Oh yeah, I use Bolton. Bolton makes me look crazy." And Trump has said that more recently, right? It's like, you the mad dog theory. They gotta think you're crazy enough to go there, right? I think you guys have discussed this on the show. I was talking about, in his interview with Tucker Carlson, I would use making these threats about the N-word going atomic, right? So yeah, he played up that sort of stuff, which is probably somewhere lodged in his mind. Like that's what Nixon did, Yeah.
But
So I just don't think that those things add up. I don't think those things negate everything I lay out in this article. It's like the guy said stuff like again and again, he was serious about maybe we should scrap NATO. That's like maybe we should take the engine out of the car and see how it runs. It's like that would be a massive blow to American empire. But I kind of interrupted you.
Yeah, no. But what's fascinating is that if you get to the end of the Vox article, you actually end up seeing the writer agree with you. He writes toward the end of the piece, this recklessness, and by this recklessness, he's referring to Trump's asking for war plans for invading Mexico and all these other things that he's doing. He writes, this recklessness is actually part of why the foreign policy establishment is so implacably hostile to the former president. He has challenged the plans of the post-World War II international order, like NATO and free trade, which they believe ensure global stability. And his alternative is a foreign policy based on America's unrestrained violent id, except for that last passage, and actually maybe even including that last passage. That passage could have come out of your piece, it feels like. It's
almost like they just don't want to give Trump what you gave him, even if it's accurate. I don't know. It's almost like an attitude.
Right, which is, I think, a serious mistake for people on the left. Because another thing about Trump's foreign policy is that he's very intuitive. He's a very intuitive politician, right? He's like the idiot savant of American politics. It's like the jazz musician who can't read music but knows exactly what notes to play, right? And a lot of people in this country are anti-war, even as they're like patriotic and kind of machista in their kind of pro-military sensibility. They're also anti-war. They love the military but don't really want their cousin to go off to some country and possibly get killed and have all this money go over there. And people don't have to have a particularly sophisticated understanding of American foreign policy to not like a lot of it, right? Just be like, well, I don't really know where Ukraine is. I don't understand this, but I see that there's a lot of regular people being killed. And I mean, I don't like this. I don't understand it. I don't like it. And I know it's expensive. And there are needs right here at home which are being underfunded, right? At that level, a lot of people have a pro-peace position. They don't like the empire, even as they love the military, right, and love the flag. And Trump taps into that, and he plays to that. And that, I think, it was very important in his initial election. I wrote an article for Non-Site years ago, right after the election, about Trump's rallies. I watched a whole bunch of them on C-SPAN. And it was the whole anti-war, end the forever wars, bring the troops home, have a peaceful foreign policy. That was a very big part of his message, much bigger than xenophobic, racist, anti-immigrant talking points were part of his message, they were clearly part of his message. But
he talked about it constantly on the campaign trail.
So those who are so hostile to the idea that Trump gains traction with voters because of his foreign policy, I think you're making a mistake, because I think the Democrats should be more peaceful, and that politicians on the left, progressives, the squad, that they made a big mistake by supporting war credits for Ukraine and all that. They should be much more, from Bernie on down to the rest of them, they should be much more hostile to American empire, not only because it's the right thing to do, but I actually think it would have traction with voters. I don't think most Americans are into the American empire.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And a good lesson, because the left's, I think, resistance to what you outlined shows that they haven't absorbed some of the political lessons, let alone the moral ones, but the political lessons of Trump's rise.
Yeah, and just so people, I want to read this one more time from Vox. Trump has challenged the pillars of the post-World War II international order, like NATO and free trade, which they believe ensure global stability. Like that is agreeing with your piece in an essay that says that they're disagreeing with it.
Yep.
So, which I think is so instructive about the kind of confusion of this time that we're living in, and some of it deliberate confusion and some of it earnest.
Agree.
Yeah.
So Christian, thanks. Go ahead.
You know, I mean, there's also, there are the 1%. Let's not forget this. I mean, they benefit tremendously from the role of American empire. Part of why there's all this flight capital that props up real estate markets, props up asset values, is rooted in the fact that the U.S. projects power globally, and that's part of what draws money in that benefits the 1% and the speculator class, but not the regular people. And so there's that element in this resentment towards Trump as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you mentioned cheap raw materials and cheap labor as well. Yeah. And when you get to those, then you see the 1% and the middle class kind of in direct conflict when it comes to the value of American empire. Yeah. Because yes, the middle class is going to get cheaper stuff that boosts the kind of consumer economy, but they're also getting entire industries hollowed out and no longer able to support families with wages.
Yep.
Deindustrialization is part of the blowback that comes from this global project of domination by subjugating the world, making it safe for foreign investment. Well, that means, U.S. direct investment. That means those are the conditions, the preconditions for the departure of American industries. So,
and that's why it's married with like elite politics and the fashionable politics of the elite, because you see that in their aversion to this argument, even though they will walk through it logically and be like, well, basically it's right, but it's icky. Right.
And also, he's not nonviolent.
Yeah.
And I think we can all agree with that. He's not.
No, I think that's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Christian, thanks so much for joining us. This fascinating piece.
Yeah.
And I think we're all kind of groping in the dark in this new politics.
Yeah. And folks can check it out in compact.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for having me on, and good luck with the show. You guys
Thanks
doing
so
a great
much.
job.
Appreciate it.
Before we started recording, we were even trying to define the politics of compact, which will publish Zizek, and it'll publish, Sohrab Ahmari obviously is a big part of compact. So it's a fascinating publication. I definitely recommend people check it out. And that essay is a great example of why. Yeah,
and I saw somebody on Twitter saying, oh, well, this is BS. People don't know that Parenti actually supported the Iraq War. I was like, I've known Christian for more than 20 years. I was like, I actually marched with him in 2002 against the Iraq War, so I can personally testify that he was not supportive of that war. Christian actually is, in many ways, is the reason I got into journalism. I got fired from this job as a pot lobbyist, and he was like, come down to Bolivia and cover this uprising with me. That's back in 2005, and so I went down, and there was an uprising. Morales ends up taking power as a result of it. I think the next year he and I went to Iraq, covering the war over there at the time, and so we've covered the blowback and the impact of American empire ourselves. So it would not be the case to say that he's supportive of the Iraq War or American empire or something like that. Interesting piece, and I like the idea that what the left could draw from this is not that Trump is good, or not that Trump is nonviolent, and not that Trump even has some coherent kind of foreign policy that the left ought to adopt, but that there are grains of public sentiment that can be gleaned from this, and that the left does have permission to be much more anti-war and much more anti-imperialist than it has been, and would be rewarded by voters for doing the right thing as a result. And what they could do is, contra Trump, actually put out a coherent American foreign policy that benefits the working class and the middle class, rather than then you have a choice between a chaotic one where you're like, is this guy going to get us nuked?
Yeah.
In the process of doing this kind of vandalism, or do we have a progressive vision of of a rollback of American empire that isn't going to get us nuked.
And so much of it is, yes, the capitalistic part of it is important, but it's also just so wrapped up in elite signaling. If you look at MSNBC during the Iraq War versus MSNBC now, it is all warmongering. Like it would be very rare to hear an argument like the one that Christian just made on MSNBC today, as opposed to MSNBC in 2007, 2006. And part of it is, I think, because it's become very in vogue to just completely pretend that the Iraq War didn't happen, right? That like we didn't learn any of those lessons, and to cozy up literally to Bill Kristol in some like very obvious
And Nicole
ways.
Wallace.
And Nicole Wallace.
Spokesperson for the Iraq War.
Yeah. So they're not reading the room.
No.
Even though it's right there. It's on a silver platter.
Yeah, it's right there. It's right there.
Well, that does it for us this week on Counterpoints. We hope everybody has a great rest of their week. We will see you back here next Wednesday.
See you then.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.